A few years ago, Elon Musk was asked on live television about his biggest Chinese competitor. He laughed, not a polite laugh, a dismissive one, the kind of laugh that says, "This is not even worth my time." Today, that laugh has become one of the most expensive moments of arrogance in the history of modern business. This is not a story about electric cars. This is a story about how one man, operating almost entirely in the shadows, engineered a decades-long plan to dismantle the Western auto industry from the inside, quietly, methodically, without firing a single shot. His name is Wang Chuanfu, and most people in the West have never heard of him. That is not an accident. The rules of capitalism are simple. You cannot sell a product for less than it costs to make, not for long, not without going bankrupt, unless, of course, your company was never designed to follow those rules in the first place. BYD does not operate like a company. It operates like a military campaign with a balance sheet. To understand why, you have to go back to the beginning. Wang Chuanfu did not start in the car business. He started in batteries. In 1995, with borrowed money and a factory that looked more like a warehouse, he began producing rechargeable battery cells for consumer electronics. While the world was watching Silicon Valley, Wang was quietly building something far more dangerous: total control over the one component that would eventually power everything. By the time the world realized that electric vehicles were the future, BYD had already spent a decade perfecting the exact technology that every other automaker would desperately need. They did not just enter the EV race, they had been building the track the whole time. This is where the mathematics become impossible to explain under normal market logic. A BYD Seagull, a fully electric vehicle with real range, real technology, real safety features, sells for under $10,000. $10,000! In a world where the cheapest Tesla costs over $30,000 and the average new car in the United States costs nearly $50,000, that number does not compute. It should not exist. And yet, there it is. Western analysts looked at that price and assumed it was a loss leader, a temporary move to grab market share before prices normalized. They were wrong. The price is not a promotion. The price is the weapon. Because BYD does not just build the car, they build the battery, they mine the lithium, they refine the materials, they manufacture the chips, they control the supply chain at every single level, from the ground to the showroom floor. No other automaker on earth does this. Not Tesla, not Toyota, not Volkswagen, nobody. When Ford or General Motors build an electric vehicle, they're assembling components purchased from dozens of suppliers, each one adding their own margin. When BYD builds a car, the entire value chain belongs to them. The result is a cost structure that Western companies cannot replicate without dismantling and rebuilding everything they have built over the last century. And here's where it gets darker. BYD does not operate in a vacuum. The Chinese government has spent years pouring billions into the domestic EV sector: subsidies for manufacturers, incentives for buyers, state-backed loans with terms that no private bank would offer. The official story is that this was about clean energy and national development. The actual result is that BYD was able to scale at a speed and at a price point that would have been financially impossible in any free market. The playing field was never level. It was engineered to be asymmetric from the start. Western governments began to notice. The United States raised tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to 100%. 100! That means a BYD car that cost $10,000 to produce would face an additional $10,000 in taxes just to enter the American market. On paper, it looks like an airtight wall. But walls only work if there are no doors. While politicians in Washington and Brussels were congratulating themselves on their tariff strategy, BYD was already executing the next move on the board: Mexico, Hungary, Turkey, Brazil. BYD began constructing manufacturing facilities in countries that have existing free trade agreements with the United States and the European Union. A car assembled in Mexico under certain conditions crosses the American border with the same tariff burden. A car built in Hungary ships freely across Europe. The wall was not bypassed, it was made irrelevant. This is the part that keeps trade lawyers awake at night, because there is nothing illegal about it. BYD is not breaking the rules. They're playing a different game entirely, one with a longer time horizon, a larger map, and a level of strategic patience that the Western corporate model is simply not designed to match.
American and European automakers operate on quarterly earnings cycles. Their executives are measured by what happens in the next 90 days. Wang Chuanfu thinks in decades. He spent 20 years building a battery empire before most people knew what a lithium-ion cell was. He doesn't need to win next quarter. He needs to outlast everyone else. And at this rate, he will. Meanwhile, the traditional auto industry is caught in a trap it built itself. Transitioning to electric vehicles is expensive. The infrastructure, the retooling, the retraining of workers, it costs billions before a single car rolls off the line. And now, at exactly the moment when Western companies are most financially exposed, most vulnerable, most dependent on their EV investments succeeding, BYD is flooding their markets with product at prices they cannot match and cannot ignore. Volkswagen, once the most powerful automaker in Europe, announced factory closures for the first time in its history. Ford posted billions in losses on its EV division. Stellantis warned investors of margin collapse. These are not small companies making small mistakes. These are century-old industrial giants being systematically undercut by a competitor who has been preparing for this exact moment for 30 years. And Elon Musk, the founder of a company built on the idea of disrupting incumbents, was now asking the government to protect him from being disrupted. The irony is almost too precise to be accidental. But this is the part nobody wants to say out loud. BYD is not trying to win a car war. The car is just the current battlefield. The end game is something much larger: control over the global energy transition. Every country on Earth is electrifying its transportation. Every country will need batteries. Every country will need the supply chain that BYD has spent 30 years building. The company that controls the batteries controls the movement of people and goods in the 21st century. That is not a business strategy. That is geopolitical architecture, and it is already more than halfway built. The West spent years debating whether China was a real competitor in advanced technology. Meanwhile, China was not debating anything. It was executing. There's a question that no government official, no auto executive, and no Wall Street analyst have been able to answer convincingly. If a competitor controls their own raw materials, manufactures their own components, sells at prices you mathematically cannot match, and routes around every trade barrier you erect, what exactly is your move? So far, the answer has been tariffs that get bypassed, subsidies that arrive too late, and committees that meet to discuss the problem while the problem gets larger. Wang Chuanfu does not give interviews about world domination. He doesn't post on social media. He doesn't appear at conferences to tell you what he's building. He just builds it, quietly, precisely, with the kind of discipline that turns a borrowed battery factory in 1995 into the most disruptive industrial force on the planet 30 years later. The laugh Elon Musk gave that day on television was not wrong at the time. BYD was by every Western metric a joke, a cheap Chinese knockoff company with no brand, no design, no global presence. That's exactly what Wang Chuanfu needed everyone to believe. Now tell me, do you think the West still has a real move left on this board, or is the game already over? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you think.